Welcome to the ITAD Talk podcast with your host, Jeff Bittner.
So I'd like to introduce my guest this morning, and it's Daniel Lobonovsky, and he is the sales in ITAD at Terabit Systems. And Daniel has over a decade of purchasing and sales experience in the secondary market, specializing in end user and broker sales for Arista and Juniper networking hardware. So I'd like to say welcome to you, and thanks for being on our podcast.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. And yeah, please excuse me if I don't reply quick enough, because this is officially the first podcast I've ever done. So
Okay.
thanks for having me.
Sure. Yeah, you're very welcome. So do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe how you got into the industry?
Sure. So myself, I was grew up, born and raised in San Francisco, California, and went to college over at USF and did my thing and jammed out to Japan for about 6 to 8 years, and eventually came back to the U.S. and had a degree in economics. So I thought, oh, why don't I merge? At that time, I had a bit of a sales background, and why don't I merge that with economics and go into finance? And got into finance, and that lasted until about 2008. I was on the sales desk for a company that basically did venture capital loans and heavy equipment leasing. And I think you remember 2008, yes. We had the collapse in the US. So I was looking for something else to do after the sales desk went from like 6, 5, 4, 3.
Oh my gosh. Me. How scary.
And it was, but it was actually, in retrospect, one of the best things that could have happened to me. So I was a little tired at that time of finance because I didn't feel I was selling anything tangible. That was for myself. So, I basically would sell a product and move on, and I wasn't developing any long-term relationships or anything like that. But I didn't even realize it at that time because I didn't even know what that meant. But I had a friend of a friend who was starting a business in IT network hardware, and I had heard about the industry when I lived in Santa Barbara. There was, at the time, it was called NHR, but it's Curvature now, and It's bought by somebody else since. But you buy and sell this network equipment gear, and generally it turned into more of selling network equipment gear for them. But so I met up with this friend who started this company, Terabit Systems, named Brian Stadmiller, and he focused on off-brands because it was, at the time, and it's even more so now, like a crowded industry, but at the time it was like Cisco. Everybody did Cisco. So we focused on Brocade, which was essentially Foundry, IP Ethernet hardware, not their SAN gear. And Brian had found a niche with a lot of clients that he developed in the Netherlands. And I said, well, I've worked in Japan. Maybe I could develop some Japanese clients, which I did. And we also had a Japanese web page and everything as well. I got a translator to work on that.
So a quick question on that. So were you then shipping back and forth internationally, or did you guys set up like a satellite office over there?
No satellite offices, just phone calls in the evening, trying to impress Japanese junk dealers with my language skills. And,
I was just about to ask, do you speak the language or a little bit?
I do. I took Japanese in college. I got a minor in it, and then I studied quite a bit extensively to the point where I could become like a technical translator for this department. I worked for JCB, which was the Japan Credit Bureau, and I worked for their sales side in the U.S., and then I moved to Japan, and lo and behold, the guy who had been working for them for 10 years was like, yeah, I want to leave. And my manager in the U.S. put in a good word for me, and I got the job. And I didn't know much Japanese, but I wouldn't say to the technical level, but yeah.
So here's one more question. When you were living over there, did you end up dating some of the Japanese girls? I'm just curious.
I was not only dating, but I was also married to a Japanese woman.
Really?
And that could be a whole podcast in itself.
I'm kind of curious. So, like, was she kind of like the traditional girl and kind of did the tea ceremonies and things like that, or?
Not so much. I was young at the time. I was 25. She was 21, getting out of school, and I had met her through an English teaching job that I had. And it's this story. If you talk to a foreigner who's taught in Japan, you'd probably hear a million times over. But the most interesting part about this time too is like, pre-iPhone, pre-everything, like getting around Tokyo, it's like survive or die. And so I think that really forces you into, either getting a girlfriend or a boyfriend or someone who's a native there. And you really enjoy the country a lot more too that way. But yeah, so we made the kind of quick decision to get married, and that lasted only, after I think 2.5 years, it pretty much fell apart. But I stayed in Japan a little bit longer, and then said it's time to come home.
Gotcha. Okay, and then from there you moved to San Francisco?
I did. I moved back. My mom was in San Francisco. She had sold a house, moved up to Sonoma. So I planted myself in Sonoma for a couple months till I found a job, and then I moved to Santa Barbara. That's when I got onto another sales position, which was the sales desk at John Hancock, and that was a fun job. But then eventually got my Series 6, then my 63, then my Series 7, and moved back to San Francisco. And that's where I ended up in the company right before I went into network hardware.
And so that's where you live currently, is in San Francisco?
San Rafael now, actually, okay. Which is right north of San Francisco.
So just like as a baseline, what does it cost to rent a 1 or 2 bedroom place there now?
Oh, wow. So San Francisco, when I came back, I guess this was around 2008, you could rent a 1 bedroom for $1,300.
Oh, okay. That's not too bad.
No, I guess not. But at the time, that was probably, I don't know, you'd put half of what you earned into rent, if not a little bit less. So it was expensive, but yeah, I think you'd get a 1 bedroom around that rate. Then I had moved to another 1 bedroom apartment. I got that for $1,500, came with parking, and I literally stayed there for about 12 years until we moved up over to San Rafael. But I mean, now you're looking in San Francisco at like, I'm assuming, when I left my apartment, I know it went up. The rent went from $1,500 to $3,250.
Oh my gosh! That was for like a 1 bedroom.
1 bedroom in the western part of the city, which is like by Ocean Beach, less desirable, blah blah blah. Huh. But it was kind of catching on. So I think, and at the time we were looking for houses in San Rafael, so renting a house was like $5,000 a month. Yeah, around there, 5 to 6.
Huh.
But yeah, so that's another one of the challenges in the Bay Area is you always have to find kind of the hustle that works for you, and hardware has been one of those. So
like for your staff, I mean, I know everybody's having trouble hiring people now. So like your technicians and stuff. So is it hard for them, or you just have to pay, huge premium to get people, or?
That's really, really a good question, because I'd say 10 years ago when we started the business, it was kind of like, okay, everyone hangs on and does their thing. But it would be much harder to get, I would say, younger talent now. Because I think we're going to touch upon this too, but how did you get into networking equipment and why?
Yes.
And I don't know anybody. I have not yet met one person who is in this industry by design.
Okay.
So that's always a really interesting thing. I've met people who have come out of like hardware sales, but not necessarily who wanted to go into like used hardware sales or procurement. So it's tough. We have people here in the Bay Area that I think have had established jobs earlier. They didn't get into this industry and work their way on up, so to say. Like the techs had, worked at Cisco for a while, maybe got tired of that environment, wanted something more laid back. of course, the pay and the benefits and everything are very different. But yeah, I don't think San Francisco or a very overhead heavy location is where you'd want to start a business like this today at all.
I'm curious too, like when you're working with, corporate clients, and since you do specialize in the networking gear, because like, for example, we cater to the decommissioning of data center IT assets, for example, and it's usually like where you go in and they kind of want you to take, at least all the IT gear, or maybe they break it down into the IT gear, and then you've got, the generators and flooring and so on. So I'm just kind of curious, how does that relate to how you guys do business, and how are you kind of able to separate specifically the networking gear from the rest of the gear that's coming out?
We will just sell pieces off. If we have a takeout of that nature, that's either something we won't bid on, or we'll have a partner who's interested in that. A lot of times things like PDUs or whatever, they go for very, very little money.
Right.
And
they're heavy.
Yeah, they're heavy, right? So you're not going to move those around that much, although there's a demand for them. And I've met people who specialize in them, but they may live in Kansas, where they have a lot more space available to them. But the funny thing is we also compete, with companies that are based in the Midwest or, somewhere in the Northeast. So the fact that and this is an interesting question too, because someone asked me at a trade show recently, it's like, well, why that hardware? And I was like, good question. Didn't really think about it all that much, but it's essentially where the money is in networking. The routing and the switching components are much higher dollar. They tend to hold their value a little bit longer, and you have to move less bulk of it than, say, something like servers or storage equipment. And I think just the expense of the shelf space in San Francisco kind of dictated what we do.
So tell us a little bit more about when you kind of started working there, and then the transition of the industry, and kind of like, has there been any changes? And, because you mentioned that you're kind of specializing in that type of equipment. Are there any kind of changes that are going on?
Sure. Yeah, big time. So when we started, we focused on, again, routing and switching hardware from Brocade, which at that time had just purchased Foundry, and they had come out with this MLX or MLXC lineup. And you started looking at these cars and you go, oh, wow, 10. So everything was going from 1 gig to 10 gig. Then, the next top was currently what we're dealing with. 40 was kind of there, but not completely there. The big one has been 100 gig. So we're helping a lot of clients, I guess, smaller to mid-sized companies who 100 gig was sort of out of the question, or wasn't even a need for them a couple years ago, pretty much desperately needing it now, which sucks because everything slowed down with the supply chain, and normally where, they'd be paying a lot less for this kind of gear, they're actually paying slightly proportionately more for it now, just because of the way everything's constrained.
So a question on the gear, because I know a lot of the companies have their own software. So are you, do you have like some certifications with the manufacturer to be able to do resets, or is that not needed for those types?
No, we don't. I mean, you can't charge for anything like software or something like that, obviously. But yeah, we have techs that are proficient or versed in whatever operating system it is. For Juniper, it's Juno, Cisco, EOS, and there's similarities, I guess more so with Arista and Cisco than there is with Juniper. But I'm not. That's another thing for myself as a salesperson, is I definitely try not to position myself as an engineer, someone who like deeply knows the technical side of things. But Well, sorry, I guess I lost track of that question there.
No, I think that was it. And then you were talking about the transition going to the
Yes.
from the 40 gig to the 100 gig. So where's is the 100 gig material kind of come out of like the telecoms? Is that kind of where a lot of that stuff, or more of the data centers, or a little bit of both?
Yes, absolutely. Previous, cloud companies, telecoms, data centers. 100 gig. And now the thing is people are looking to bump up, and it's already out there. They're just having trouble sourcing the optics, so it's not completely usable. But 400 gig is out there from, Juniper,
Wow.
Arista, Nokia, which had purchased Alcatel-Lucent. That's the next jump we're seeing. And we're not seeing any of our clients yet asking for 400 gig equipment to us directly, because it's so new that we have clients that sometimes will purchase new hardware and used hardware and sort of supplement their budget or save money by buying used hardware. That's definitely one of the sales pitches or approaches when you start talking to people. But we couldn't even provide 400 gig if we were asked for it.
So if you get a pretty good size load in, how long does it typically take for the inspection process and the techs to go over it and to kind of wipe the operating system and so on?
That's, I'd say something like a pallet of 100 switches can take, a couple of techs a week, maybe.
Okay, gotcha.
But it doesn't take them a week of full time. That's a week in between doing orders, and getting.
Right. Well,
gear
it seems like
well.
when you're bringing in used gear, there's always, a lot of little things. Maybe there's small components that need to be replaced, or a corner, or things like that too as you're going through. And so, or maybe one of the systems gets hung and as you're trying to get into the operating system. So it's definitely kind of a whole process. I was curious too, what type of do you have like any certifications that go along with that industry? Like, for example, since we're an ITAD company also, we're doing R2 and so on.
Yeah. None for us. Okay. So years ago, we brought up, why not get certified? And there were some hurdles involved, and we just didn't pursue it any further than that. So I think another thing that's interesting about our industry is you look at it, and when you say, oh, how much gear can you go through and what do you do? There's like maybe 300-pound, 800-pound gorillas in the room. And then there's just a bunch of us. So and by us, I mean companies that do between, $5 and $10 million in revenue a year. And those operations are generally no more than, a few well-seasoned salespeople, people who work in tech, and then some people who handle kind of like the back office and managerial processes. So they're pretty tightly run ships.
Yeah, that's really important. Especially, since you're in an area where the labor is expensive and the cost of living. You really, that's important to be able to operate with an efficiency in your industry.
We invite you to follow and subscribe to the ITAD Talk podcast, your source for conversations with luminaries, visionaries, and innovators in the fields of business and technology. You can find the latest episode at itadtalk.com and on all your favorite podcast apps. And don't forget, the best way to support ITAD content is to rate and like the show on iTunes, Google, Spotify, or anywhere you might listen.
Welcome to ITAD Talk and part 2 in this series. Here's your host, Jeff Bittner.
So then when you're working with the various clients, they don't appear to be picky then about the certifications and things like that. Because like in our business, not everybody is, but there are a fair amount. They're just kind of worried about the data, and if everything's wiped properly. And so that's kind of where a little bit of that comes into play.
Yeah, I've just started reading that book. I think we all got a copy of it from ITAD, but something about data security. And I was like, yeah, no, a lot of that. So we will, from where we buy in the supply chain, oftentimes that's already done. And if not, it's not a very difficult process, but to at least erase the data. Mm-hmm. And a lot of what we purchase may not, routing and switching, there's not a lot of memory on there that's going to be storing these types of things, like as opposed to like somebody's laptop,
Understood.
Good. So like, yeah, we don't have to crush or do things like that. But for us, it would be more like, okay, well, if a corporate client came to us and we would provide the most money on this, buyback scenario for this portion of the hardware, then we would partner with somebody who is R2 certified or something like that in order to destroy things properly. So.
Right. Yeah. And I remember at the ITAD Summit show that that was kind of one of the talks that was going on about partnering with various companies in your space, whether it be, if you're doing a foreign takeout or things of that nature. Yeah, we recently did a takeout. It was one data center in the United States and then 2 international data centers. So it worked out really well for us. But so what do you see as some of the biggest challenges working in the IT sales area?
Just the ability to, especially in my job, because it's constant hustle. You don't turn off at all. It's being able to keep up with what's changing along product lines, whether what's happening in the industry, what new protocol, your this engineer that you're talking to is all about, and how does that work with the chipset in this switch as opposed to the chipset in the switch that was introduced 2 years later or something like that, or maybe his network's based on that prior chipset, so they want to stick to that. It's just all, how do you keep building this library of technical knowledge, and that's and staying current, and also being kind of like a maybe 6-year switch historian,
Right.
So that takes a lot of nerding out to
well, it's kind of like around. A little bit of an artist too, because you got to have all that kind of technical knowledge, and it's not like it's either like this or like that. There's a lot of things that vary that you have the product knowledge for. So that's really important.
Right, and that's where I try to differentiate myself with, like, say, someone who just came onto a sales desk and is, looking for a client. Is, if you're going to call me, we're going to have that conversation. It's going to be done, or I'm going to find an answer for you, and it's not going to take you more than 20 minutes. Whereas, other times, and this is just true for sales in general, I think, is you're kind of like trying to perfect it as an art, or working at it as an art. You want to use less of your client's time because you realize how important it is.
So when you quote a job, how long does it typically take for you to, like, if somebody's offering you various switches and things like that? I mean, is the pricing pretty stable and you've kind of got it, or do you kind of have to, kind of work on that? Maybe it takes you 24 hours or 48 hours to turn around pricing?
Yeah, if we have something in stock, I mean, I can price the variety of most of what people will come to us for off the top of my head. But if it's something that I have to go look for, it's a 48-hour turnaround at most.
Is it like that when you're buying too, or do you kind of know the buy prices on all the products, or do you kind of have to check market price and see if some product's being flooded and so on?
Yeah, you do definitely want to do your due diligence before you put down $100,000 on one line item or something like that. But we're pretty, we communicate a lot as a team. So I talk with my boss, talk with another sales partner, and just kind of judge what whether this item's been selling or what we paid for it historically. However, what we found is for ourselves, I think we're always worried, oh, did we buy too much?
Mm.
And unless it's a real crapshoot of a switch or something that just doesn't have legs, we've never been caught in that type of predicament where we lose ourselves on something. And
that's great.
Yeah, we're pretty lucky, but we also, don't wander too far out of or off the trail from what we're typically used to, where that might be giving up some opportunity for revenue, but it certainly hasn't sunk our ship. So that's so far so good on that.
So do you have any stories of challenging customers or clients?
Yeah.
A few?
I do have a few. Most of them have been really cool over the years. I live in an environment where, for myself, my business has grown through referrals, and I absolutely love that. So I will take referrals and work with clients of clients or friends of clients and that type of thing. But, the scenario, and this took me a long time to learn in the beginning, was like, the guy who wants you on the phone at 3:30 or 4:30 on a Friday afternoon, like, do not establish that relationship into anything, because that's what a lot of your communication is going to look like. And I had a client like that who was eventually had some kind of, bad reputation that I didn't, or maybe scarred reputation that I didn't know about. I think he was doing some kind of like spam emailing out of Vegas, or I don't even know what it was. And then I'd get on the phone on a Saturday, on my time off, having done something at lunch or whatever, talking to some engineer that he just hired on a whim. And then you'd notice, a month later, that would be a different engineer. And it's like, okay, I don't care if I'm losing business. I'm not going to pick up that phone, at 4:30 on a Friday, unless it's someone I know. So, yeah.
So then some of the people that are buying the equipment and placing it, they may not have all the skill sets, and they're trying to troubleshoot for their clients. They're trying to use you for the technical knowledge. Is that kind of what it's like? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, for sure. And we are not that. Oftentimes, it's like you should at least go get a quote from the OEM or talk to them or understand. And most of our clients do, if they're not dealing with them already. So by the time they come to us, they have, they're not coming to us just about price, because sometimes they do need support, 24-hour support, or next day business replacement, or things that we can't necessarily provide. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Difficult customers are not much fun, for sure.
Do you have any horror stories?
Trying to think. It seems like we really have to watch out for is when we're buying product, and sometimes. I mean, it's gotten better, but we used to deal with a lot of the recyclers, which we kind of don't as much anymore. We kind of more so deal with the corporate clients, but a lot of times they would, tell you everything is grade A. They'd want you to prepay for it, and then you get the material, and 25% of it's junk, and then you try to get an RMA, and they just, they're impossible to try to get a return from. So those sorts of things, which we don't really have those problems currently. So which is much better. So.
Totally. You just reminded me of one other thing. So it's like, if you ask me about a tough client versus if you were going to ask, accounting, and this is always something in our business because these new companies pop up all the time, is how do you sort of establish that line of credit with somebody that, doesn't have a ton of business history. And that's always a very, very fine thing to balance. But, I'd say maybe over the 10 years, we've had to go into collections on someone maybe 5 times or threaten, but it's usually pretty rare. So we try to sniff all that stuff out in the beginning, but I definitely wouldn't be extending credit or paying cash up front for people you don't have a long history or established history of business with.
So is a large percentage of your business then on like net 30 terms?
It is now, I would say, yeah.
So was that, I mean, like a problem during the shutdowns and things? I mean, were people kind of slow paying during that period, or did it seem to function well?
I don't think, there was a scare in the beginning, but our business, being an essential business, is pretty much chugged right along. Some months were a little bit slower than others. Some months were, incredibly better than what we did previously a year before. So I think it was more of a fear than a reality of people not being able to pay. But I do remember talking to a couple of clients who were in entertainment, and they would be doing things like post-production with film, or digital post-production and all that. And that business like slowed up for them. Or anyone.
It's funny you mentioned that, because we actually did a takeout for a film studio. So it's quite interesting, because I mean, a lot of the equipment was just so high end. I mean, they had these server backpacks and these goggles where you could be in a foreign country and see yourself walk down the street. And I mean, the techs were in heaven back there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool stuff.
So I think the last question I had was how the processes and methods have changed since you started, and I think you kind of covered some of that. I don't know if you had anything more to add on that or not.
I would just say, for someone in ourselves, like I keep going back to the term like unique as a company, but as reps who still do their own buying and selling and stocking, and what would you call it, even business development, things like that. We wear so many different hats that it's like over the years going from like a pen and paper to, which I still use all the time, by the way, but to having a more kind of technological way of keeping your notes and your workflow organized with like tools or Salesforce or,
CRM,
different types of CRMs. Yeah. That's been super important, because without a CRM, I mean, there's no way that I could, juggle a couple hundred clients and stay in touch with them and things like that. So just sort of trying to, and there are more tools as times developed over the last decade, but, that's important for me to stay up on as a salesperson. And I know I'm okay at using those tools. I'm not super efficient, but that's probably something that I've had to change over the years.
Hey, so one question kind of that goes a little bit along with that. How do you guys manage, like for each salesperson's budget on what they can go out and procure? And then, because a lot of times salespeople, like when they're buying a lot, maybe, 80% of it's flippable prime merchandise, 20% of it's slow mover, and then of course, and that keeps adding up over time. So do you guys have, is there some sort of mechanism they have to kind of make the salespeople kind of keep flushing out old stock?
Yeah, it's the boss's scrutiny, really. It's not much more than that. And if you have a reputation of putting gear into stock that you don't sell or turn over that quickly, then your buys get more and more scrutinized. So we don't unfortunately have like effective processes in place for that, but it's kind of worked. So, if you have a history of buying the right item and, the gross profit is good to excellent on it, then your buys are pretty much going to go unquestioned. But yeah, every now and then, and we have smaller warehouse space. So if the boss is going through there, it's getting checked and this corner of the warehouse isn't moving, then that's a bad sign. But that, to me, inventory, especially this stuff, I mean, it could consume you in just drive you into a deep depression if you don't control it somehow. So luckily that's not really my issue, but if it were, yeah, I would be very careful of taking on certain items for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else that you wanted to add, or that you thought of based upon the different topics we talked about?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, you know, our industry, quote unquote, like, where do you see it going in the next 5 years? Or,
Okay.
yeah, let's just start with that one.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, I mean, we see a lot of companies going to the cloud, so obviously there won't be a lot of repeat business there, except for, the infrastructure that they have, like desktops and laptops and things like that. So that's kind of one trend that we see. But it does seem like that, in certain sectors, whether it be healthcare and things like that, that those institutions want to control that data. So there's kind of both things moving forward. But yeah, I guess the question will probably be, I mean, is it eventually going to be Microsoft and Google and things that kind of will control all the data center markets, or is there still going to be, those companies that have their own data centers? So I mean currently it looks like that's going to be the case, but is there anything that you're seeing on that?
Well, you mentioned, companies going to the cloud. There's a ton of cloud service providers out there, and, Google, Amazon always comes up because they're ginormous, but there's other people doing clouds in every country across the world. So, have you guys thought about, oh, okay, well, we understand, this whole cloud thing now. Why don't we see what kind of hardware cloud service providers are using and what do they do? Or, because I feel like that's how I've heard about this before, where, oh, our industry is going to be over because people don't maintain like little racks in their office buildings anymore. Well, that was dying 10 years ago and stuff was moving into data centers. So it's kind of like, as long as there's data centers, maybe I'm not well enough educated about the whole topic, but I'm kind of a believer in the underdog and the smaller company, because that's primarily who we deal with. And some of those go on to be much larger companies that they're acquired, but I just feel like there's always going to be competition for high-end hardware and sort of like entrepreneurial people who want to do different things with it.
Right. And it seems like, too, I mean, in our industry, you don't necessarily have to be a first mover, but I mean, if you kind of follow the money and get in back of where the money's moving, and just make sure, because I mean, if the money's starting to go down to a trickle, then you're in the wrong sector, right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. So maybe that's what we've been doing too, is sort of following the money, because if we had stayed with a certain segment of clients that analyzing it now, I don't know what it is, but 10 years ago to today, it's very different. So, I could see if you had a large corporate client that you're selling all these laptops and PCs to, and these big networking environments who are moving to the cloud, then that could be a problem.
But I mean, it seems like too that anytime you have a speciality and you keep adding skills, that's going to kind of make you more valuable to your corporate clients. So when I kind of first started in the industry, I was dealing with a lot of Intel processors, and I mean, we still are, in memory and things like that. But a few years ago, before we really got into the data center market, I went out to visit some of those people that we would trade parts with, and I went to see this one guy, and he was actually in Northern California. I mean, the guy still had like a monochrome monitor on his desk. He had an inventory, a lot of it in back of him on shelves. Everything he was doing on paper, he would still use faxes. And I mean, the guy had like $1 million in inventory that was probably, worth, somewhat less than what he paid for it, kind of waiting for the market to come back. And I kind of looked at him and I thought, I never want to be him.
Ouch.
So that's when I started moving our company forward into the data center market, and so it's been a really good move for us. And I mean, the whole way along, we've had to, learn new skills and get all the certifications, and learning how to wipe the hard drives and the data, and then like with the kind of the servers that come in, that those get put back to factory resets, and that there's make sure there's no settings that are the way the company had them set up, so there's no pathways back into those corporate networks and things like that. So it's kind of been a learning experience, but I think that's what kind of makes the business fun, right?
Yes, because otherwise, you look at it and it is what it is. It's junk piles of gear, and the fun part is definitely meeting somebody like yourself, or going to these shows and kind of putting together the pieces of how our industry works. But piece by piece, I think it's like, it's kind of a bland, bleak thing.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, if we can be of help or partner on some deals too, where we could use our certifications if you bump up against that's where that's necessary. We'd be glad to do a partnership on a transaction
for sure,
or some deals. So, because you've got a really good skill set there. So the specialization is, because we're dealing with so many different like Dell and HP and Supermicro servers, and then you've got all the different brands of the networking gear, and then you've got all the components, and we're really strong in memory and processors still, because that's kind of the background that I came from, and we can do repairs on those, and but a lot of times high-end processors come in that are damaged, and we've got the ability to repair those. We got like 600 different components back there that we can repair the broken caps and resistors and everything like that.
So for example, I forget what those back the line cards are. They're notoriously, they break in shipping at times. Do you guys do repairs like that, or?
Yeah. So if you need some of that repair,
cool.
We can.
We invite you to follow and subscribe to the ITAD Talk podcast, your source for conversations with luminaries, visionaries, and innovators in the fields of business and technology. You can find the latest episode at itadtalk.com and on all your favorite podcast apps. And don't forget, the best way to support ITAD content is to rate and like the show on iTunes, Google, Spotify, or anywhere you might listen.